Welcome back, guys. I am Neeraj Kumar, your faculty for the subject cloud computing. We are starting our second lecture for the revision that is basically released for the help of yours in your first assessment of cloud. And in this particular lecture, we'll be talking about the hypervisors. Basically, these are the objects, we can say, which are used for the uniform and conflict-free services of the hardware resources among the users. And we will see that what are the different type of virtualization we can achieve with the help of the hypervisors. And then we will talk about the two methodologies. One is the full virtualization, second one is the para virtualization, and we will try to find out what is the difference between the between the full virtualization and para virtualization. So we will go to the topics one by one. Guys, we will talk about the full virtualization. With the help of the pen, I will be showing you the details of the diagram. In this diagram, we can see that hypervisor is directly running on the hardware. So what hypervisor do actually? Hypervisor used as a manager for the resources. It manages the resources for the applications or for the user. So users, if we say that this is the whole unit of hardware, then what the hypervisor will do, it will divide the hardware in such a manner, or we can say it will create the instances of the hardware in such a manner so that these hardware units can be shared among the users. So this is the basically this is the role of the hypervisor. It acts somehow like the operating system. What operating system do? Generally, the operating system serves a single user and uh, serves the single user and try to divide the hardware resources among the applications which are being run by the single user. But what the hypervisor do, it also manages the things for the users, but what it tries to do is tries to create the smaller chunks of the resources in such a way so that it could divide it among the uh, among among the users. Whatever user or whatever requester requests the resource which is in the form of the chunks, it's like this, is given to the user. So this is the basic role of the hypervisor. So we will talk about the full virtualization. So what the full virtualization is, in full virtualization, the hypervisor runs directly on the hardware. So we can see that the layer of the hypervisor is just above the hardware. So this type of virtualization is also known as the type 1 virtualization, or we sometimes say it bare metal hypervisor. What does it, if we go to the words, then definitely it will tell its meaning that bare means it is running metal. Metal means this is the hardware. Hardware is basically made of the metal and electronic circuits. So it's running directly, running bare on this hardware. So we call it bare metal hardware. Bare metal hypervisor, and it's a type 1 hypervisor, and it directly runs on the host hardware. So at the hardware where we want to divide the chunks, or we can say where we want to divide the resources in such a way that the resources can be shared among the users, we directly install, or we can directly patch up the hardware with the hypervisor. So it's directly runs on the host hardware. Then the third point is stability depends upon the guest OS. So what does it mean? So stability depends upon the guest OS. We can see that hypervisor can give services to the multiple operating systems. We can install multiple operating systems on this hypervisor, but there is one problem, that the stability of this whole system depends upon this guest operating system. If somehow it invades on others space, or somehow if it got failed, then it will crash whole system will be crashed. If a single guest OS, if single guest OS is crashed, then whole system will crash. So in this full virtualization mode, the stability only depends upon the guest OS. Guest OS should be reliable enough to make this whole system work work uh, reliably. Sorry, we need to, if we want that the whole full virtualization system be reliable, then the guest OS should be reliable. Now we will talk about the para virtualization. It is somehow different from the full virtualization. In full virtualization, we can see that hypervisor was directly installed on the, or we are having the patch of hypervisor directly on the hardware. But in para virtualization, the hypervisor is installed on the host operating system. Suppose I have already given you example in our class. Suppose we want to run different operating system on our computer. So one way we can do, we can partition. One way is, first way, what we can do, we can partition our drive, or we can install one, two, or three operating system directly on different spaces of our hard drive, and we can boot any one of them at a time. This was one way. This is one way. And second way is, if we are uh, having operating system running our hardware, so hardware is here, and then we are having our operating system. Suppose say we are having our Windows. Sorry, I am not having mouse, so it's somehow difficult to write it on laptop. So we are having window on hardware, then we can use, what we can use, we can use VMware software, that is a virtual manager, VMware player actually. So what the VMware do, we can install VMware as an application on it, and VMware could run any number of operating system, by just taking the ISO file of the operating system. So the hypervisor in this case is taking the services of the host operating system. So this is basically the para virtualization. This is not the full virtualization. So we can see that in this particular case, the hypervisor is running on the host operating system. So this is called as the type 2 hosted hypervisor. The type 1 was as we seen in our full virtualization, where the hypervisor was directly installed on the hardware, but in type 2, the hosted hypervisor are installed on the host operating system, and guest OS is aware about virtualization. Means guest OS should be having the knowledge that it is being running on the virtualized environment, and guest OS need to be modified. So in this particular case, if we want guest OS to do some other functionalities, so what we can do, we are not having any separate direct contact with the hardware, so we have to modify the guest OS in such a way that it can transfer its request to the hypervisor to be processed. Then hypervisor will contact with the host operating system, and it will take the services of the hardware. Then hardware will give the services to the host operating system, and somehow these requests will be processed by the hypervisor in such a way so that the guest OS can use those services. So uh, in this particular case, we need to make changes on our guest operating system when we we are we are in need of some changes in our application or in our virtual machine. So this is the case with the para virtualization. So guys, in this slide, we will be discussing what is the difference between the full virtualization and para virtualization. The first point is full virtualization is known as the bare metal hypervisor. Second one is the para virtualization is known as the hosted hypervisor. We have seen these differences in our first two slides. Then we have already seen that in full virtualization we directly runs on the hardware, and in this para virtualization we runs over the hypervisor runs over the host operating system. The stability is basically depends upon the guest OS. If guest OS fails, whole system got hampered. But in this particular case, the stability depends upon the host OS, because the hypervisors are running on the host OS, and if host OS fails, then whole system will crash. And in this particular point, we can see that guest OS is unaware, because the hardware is divided among the different users in such a way that they are independent with each other, so they are need not to be aware that they are running on the virtual environment. But in this particular para virtualization, the host OS is giving services to the services of the hardware to all the users. So in this case, every guest OS should understand and should be aware that they are running on the para virtualization, um, in a virtualization environment. And in this particular, the guest OS need not to be modified. In this, if we want any changes, then definitely we are running on the separate hardware units. We need not to change the code of our guest OS. But if we want any change in functionality, definitely we need to change the guest OS in such a way so that it will be compatible with the host operating system. So guys, I think you people got all the concepts clearly, and if you are having any doubt, you can contact me from 9 to 11:50, and after that we will be taking the assessment test, and the topics that we will be covering in our assessment will be discussed before the assessment. So if you are having any doubt or any difficulty, you can contact me. Thank you very much.